Hello. This is the traditional setup for most of the armies of Europe at this time. Basically, they would have their backbone, the foot infantry, right here. Then they'd have, in the early period, they'd have skirmish units that basically threw projectiles. Behind those would be archers. And on the flanks there would be cavalry. And let me just go and enlighten you about some of these weapons that these men used in this time to protect their homelands. Now, spears, right here, were the earliest of all weapons on this field. Used back in the Stone Age, replaced with iron, and excellent against cavalry. You could imagine that. They were replaced with iron, and they also made up the bulk of an army, until plate armor becomes very prominent. It's very hard to stab someone with armor on. Okay, the next one. Sword. Those are the swords. The sword is developed from the dagger in the Bronze Age, but didn't become really practical until steel was invented, because the longer you make a freaking sword, the more it tends to break until you have, sort of a sturdier material. So that's there. And something I don't have on the field right now were maces and axes. They become more useful as time goes on and more people start using plate armor. And it becomes common practice. These weapons can just go straight through plate armor, and often associated with Vikings. And it was the Danish who actually used them first as a weapon. Okay, and then later, in the medieval times, we have pikemen. Pikemen are very excellent at holding off these choke points, as you see here, for this little entrance to the town. Now, if the enemy or cavalry charge right into this, it's not going to be too pretty. And basically, they have just long-reaching, and it will stay that way until muskets become more practical, and you'll see that they will stay until the beginning of when muskets become more prominent. Okay, then the next one, we have the bow. The earliest that a version of the bow that was found was in South Africa about 64,000 years ago, and will be the spawn of the longbow and the idea of the crossbow, which is created in the 12th century. Let me show you. Crossbow. These are crossbows. Yeah. And they were created in the 12th century. They had a huge range, fired bolts, sometimes made of steel, if you could basically do that. While it took many years of training for an archer to become and shoot straight, anyone could use a crossbow. And cavalry was divided into three categories during the medieval period. You have the heavy cavalry, which were come in with your knights, your feudal knights and whatnot. And basically their job was to protect the flanks of an army, protect the foot from, getting outflanked, and to protect small villages if they became under attack. They'd be like the first responders of the medieval world. And then the next sort of thing were basically mounted peasants, like light horses. Here are these guys. And their job was basically to flank around the enemy and pester their flanks, and to chase down fleeing enemy units and such. And then the third branch, which is the missile cavalry, or her horse archers, fired arrows on horseback to pester the enemy before the fight. And it was noted mostly by the Mongols for their, horseback and archery. And just to let you know, the eastern kind of factions, these are the Moors. These are the people who were pestering the Spanish, who I'm using. And in the Spanish armies, they were basically the same, almost, about. But instead of this, they were very, very good at archery. They used camels sometimes. Look at the cameras. Okay, and they also used spears as the backbone of their armies. But they also used, if I can find some, African, because the Moors were located in Africa, they often used African mercenaries to do their fighting. And yeah. So let me just show you with these light horses, these missile cavalry. And basically I wanted to show you sort of the tactics that these horses would basically use